G'day mates, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be recapping everything that happened at the $2 million Gamers8 Saudi LAN. How Kami and Japko were so incredibly dominant, what happened to Queasy and Veno being griefed, and why was Setty in the hospital only 2 days out from the event. Let me just cover the actual format in case you aren't aware of how this event even worked. Gamers8 now owns DreamHack, so we had 3 DreamHacks, each with a $250,000 prize pool. We had one in San Diego, one in Dallas, and one in Sweden. The top 10 teams from each of these DreamHacks would automatically qualify straight to the Gamers8 LAN finals in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. There was also 6 teams that got in through a qualifier at the actual event, but 1 player on each of those teams or more had to actually be a Saudi Arabian citizen to play in the in-person qualifiers. Then the remaining 8 teams were invited. So we had 44 teams playing in the finals for $2 million, and including those DreamHacks, it made the prize pool almost $3 million total. As for the format, it was an 18-game tournament, 3 days, 6 games each day, the longest LAN event we have had in Fortnite history. Also, day 2 points were increased by 25%, and day 3 they were increased by 50%. So it really did make the last few days feel even more important, which was very, very important when you had Kami and Japko absolutely dominate day 1, but they still didn't have the tournament in the bag. If this was a 2-day event, it almost would have made it feel like day 2 was pointless, but with 2 more days and bonus points, it really was anyone's tournament. Also, in case you missed it, this tournament was no builds, which has upset a lot of people, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts down below. Did you enjoy the tournament? Are you enjoying these massive prize pool no build tournaments, or would you rather them keep it to a more conventional builds event? In this as well, you also got points for eliminations and placements. On day 1, you got 200 points for a win, and each elimination was 12, but obviously that was multiplied in the later days. You got to play 6 games each day, and it took your best 5 games. The way they did requeuing, because this was just run on pubs no builds, we had almost $3 million of prize pool, and this was not in the compete tab. Gamers8 had to run this on regular custom pub loot pools, just like you or anyone who has a custom code could do for like $2 customs. It is insane how much money was going around, and really didn't get any help from Epic, but this led to a whole bunch of craziness that is the reason why the tournament was so absurd. Because it was on pub loot pool, it meant everything was allowed. The Cybertron cannon, the vehicles, you had Little Whip's special serve, which if you don't know is a chug jug that you can pop instantly, and you can carry 4 of them. But craziest of all, and I honestly didn't even realize coming into this tournament it was gonna have such a big impact, you could hire the NPCs, and this was everything in this tournament. If you look at the leaderboard after day 1, for example, if you look at the 4 teams in the top 4, 3 of them have incredibly overpowered NPCs. Kami and Japko have Remedy, which is an NPC that will constantly splash you throughout the game. So what they did was every single game, they would capture the flag, getting enough gold to hire the NPC, hire Remedy, get in a vehicle, and then just drive out into zone. It would splash all 3 of them over and over again, pretty much making them unkillable. They could just sit out in Storm until it got to 6th or 7th zone, and then just drive straight in. They've got all of their porta bunkers, they have all of their shockwaves, they haven't had to use anything, base up, and then win the game. It is basically an unbeatable strategy. I also didn't realize you had Queasy and Veno, who over at Kenjutsu Crossing also have the NPC that gives you shockwaves and bunkers depending on what item you are currently holding. I think every 20 seconds or 30 seconds it gives you a half stack of bunkers or shockwaves. Then Refsguard and Ziandi, not even sure how they were holding up in 3rd place against that because they have no NPC. Then you had S-Dark and Gentle in 4th place after day 1, who had the NPC that actually revealed the next zone. So we had players like Thomas and Malabuka tweeting out things like this, talking about how every other NPC on the map is absolutely absurd. Meanwhile, their NPC just throws grenades. And even worse yet, if you were a team that just didn't even have an NPC, you lost all of those advantages. I do have to mention there were other teams around the map who had access to incredibly strong NPCs, like we had Setty and Tayson at North Slappy, who have their own version of the Remedy NPC. Because the capture flag is in the middle of Slappy, they don't get it for guaranteed every single game. They also don't have a guaranteed vehicle, so I'm gonna give Tayson and Setty a bit of backup there, but I do want to point out Kami and Japko played phenomenally well, and they clearly knew this strategy coming into the tournament. They maybe didn't know just how unstoppable it would be. The only times they would go down early is if other teams started deep playing zone with their own meds, which caused them issues. But day one, almost no one knew that this would be the strategy for the tournament going ahead. But because it was a 3-day tournament, come day two, a lot of other teams started to figure out this and started to sit deeper in zone, which started to cause Kami and Japko some issues. But a 380 point lead after one day was going to be exceptionally hard to bring back. Yet after day two, we did see a bit of a shift on the leaderboard. Kami and Japko still holding on in first by just under 400 points. S-Dark and Gentle staying in second place on 2,329. Ziandy and Revsguard also holding on into third place, but unfortunately, Queasy and Veno dropped all the way down to seventh place. Now, Veno made some tweets, which kind of gave a bit of insight into what was going on here. The teams around them started playing far more aggressive and started aiming for their NPC, actually trying to take it out of the game or secure it for themselves, as that was the recipe for Queasy and Veno's success. Fortunately for Kami and Japko, with Remedy spawning inside the major barn at Frenzy, no one could really do this to them, so their strategy was still very, very strong. We did see big jump ups in the leaderboard by Epic Whale and Acorn. Epic Whale at this point has to be one of the LAN GOATs. He has been placing so well at basically every single LAN he goes to. And then we had, of course, no surprise, Malibuka and Thomas jumping up in a top 5 on day two. They were very quiet on day one, but coming into this event, they were the clear favorites. They won the last 2 dream hacks. They had a 100% win rate at the no build lands they've been to. Thomas and Malibuka were the definite favorites coming into this, until we realized just how strong these NPCs would be. On day 3, however, we had a brand new contender appear out of nowhere. We had Hero and Fahad, another Middle East duo, have huge surges up on the leaderboard with 150% points increase on day 3. It gave them a huge chance to jump up, and they came second place overall, 3,381. But as you can see, and as you probably heard, Kami and Japko's strategy was just unbeatable. 87 eliminations, 4,019 points. They played phenomenal. They had a few rough games as teams started to figure out that strategy, like I said, of staying in zone. Storm Sickness is still in no builds, but you have to take 600 damage from Storm for it to go active, so tanking 1 and 2 ticks doesn't really do that much. The end games aren't going to heal off, while they were absurdly stacked for no builds. With being able to carry 4 bunkers in your inventory, most games had surge, and the end games would have like 30 to 40 people on half zone in no build. It was crazy, but Kami and Japko held on to the lead. Kami at this point is the LAN GOAT in my opinion. He's placed second in DreamHack Sweden, 1 point behind Kami. He won last Gamers8. He has been playing so phenomenal. He won Invitational. He is the best player on LAN right now in my opinion. We had S-Dark and Gentle clutch up third place, which meant we had 2 Middle East teams in the top 3. For S-Dark, Gentle, Hero, and Fahad, this prize money is life-changing. It's life-changing for anyone. $500,000 for first for Kami and Japko. But when you compare that to Middle East prize pool, Hero, Fahad, and S-Dark and Gentle combined basically just won about 15 or 20 Middle East FNCS finals. And I don't think a lot of people had either of these teams picked to be in their top 3. So huge shout out to them, coming from the small region, showing up big, and it was a close leaderboard. Ziandy and Refsguard missing out on top 3 by 10 points. This was a difference of $50,000, which I know Ziandy and Refsguard is going to eat at them, but they played phenomenally well. Malibuka and Thomas did the best they could again with the situation to clutch up. They came 5th place, which still makes them have a first, and 5th in the last 3 no build lands, which is very, very impressive. Epic Whale and Acorn jumping down into 6th place. The highest placed NA duo at this event was in 6th. We then had Paz and Barker representing West in 7th place on 2,994 points. Moo and Tax, and I love this team because Tax is well known as a no builds player, more so than being a builds pro who's just playing in no builds, clutching up 8th. Queasy and Veno still held on to 9th, and Veno tweeted about this saying, look, honestly, he's pretty happy with his performance considering the fact that he doesn't really grind no builds. I love that Reese Hub had a question for him of why with this amount of money would you guys not be practicing no builds? And as he responded with what we saw with the NPCs, the no build meta changes day by day, week by week. We had the 4th of July update right before this tournament, and it completely changed how the meta works. So it really does feel hard to grind grind no builds and try to stay on top of what's going on, when because it's running in pubs, it just changes night by night. 10th place, we had Threats and Booga, a very impressive performance in my opinion from Booga, who really hasn't played any no builds at all. Like, we haven't seen Booga even playing the victory cups for no builds. He just doesn't touch the game mode, and he came in 10th overall with Threats as an invited duo. That was super impressive for me, and Booga showing that he can still show up on LAN. Well, I can only imagine how hype this event would have been if it was a builds event in the compete tab, as it is almost the combined prize pool of the global championship. This was a $2 million LAN, and while I really did enjoy it, there were a lot of complaints on social media. Firstly, about the actual tournament itself, saying it took too long, the breaks were too long, the fact that it was no builds. But honestly, I think Gamers8 did the best they could with the situation they had. They clearly stated in the rules that if 2 players didn't connect, they would restart the game. So there were quite a lot of restarts, which do take a while. You've got to try to get 90 players back into a queue to get them back into the game. It's going to take a minute. But at the same time, if they didn't do requeues, they just let the game run as ahead, then people would have complained that they didn't requeue when they didn't get into game. It's really just a lose-lose situation. And I think, again, Gamers8 did the best they could. If this was a builds tournament, like a lot of people were asking for, it would have had to have been ran on pub customs as a build tournament, which meant all the crazy stuff like NPCs, the Cybertron cannon, the lag would have been horrendous. So I am actually happier, given the situation, that it was a no builds event. And I'm not the biggest fan of no builds. I only really watch the no build events if it's a lot of players or content creators that I know, because I like the storylines of watching them play, and watching the best players in the world adapt to the meta and figure it out day on day was really cool to see. We saw teams like Setty and Tayson, who were doing terribly after the first few days, come in first and second in their last 2 games, clutching up a top 3 on day 3, which actually saw them surge up the leaderboard. And Tayson in an interview went on to say, you know, we just didn't prepare for this event. We just didn't know what was happening, and we figured out the meta while we were here. We didn't deserve to do better because we didn't practice for it. And I found that really interesting to see. I do have to mention, in case you saw photos of Setty going around, he did end up in the hospital a few days out from the event. Apparently he was playing soccer or football, kicked the ball at the goals, and apparently they fell on his head, which split his head open. He was all bandaged up. He had a big black eye. So I'm going to give Setty a pass on this event. He could have come in dead last, and I still wouldn't have said anything against him, because honestly, given the circumstances, they did really, really well. We also had a lot of big org news come out of Gamers8. We had Become Legends announcing they're returning to Fortnite. They signed Mixon, Vanyak, and Kami to Become Legends. We're super excited to see one of the most legendary Fortnite orgs come back into Fortnite. I love having Veno around. I'm really excited to see what he does with these players and what he does for content. We had Epic Whale announce that he was joining FaZe. He announced this live on stage when he came out. He did the jersey reveal. We also had Paper kind of leak his own org announcement. Don't really know what happened. It wasn't officially announced that he joined Agent, which is the org that Cold just joined. So we have a new contender in the NA scene, but he kind of came out wearing an Agent jersey with Agent Paper as his name, but there was no announcement on social. They ended up announcing it later that day, which was quite interesting. But it's cool to see with these big LANs, builds or no builds, it's enough to bring a lot of orgs back into the game, because they know they'll get the representation and they want to see their name on the big stage. It was also honestly great just to have a big tournament in the middle of this competitive break. In case you guys haven't been following it, Epic has taken their usual 2-week break for summer, where there are no tournaments currently running, but tournaments are coming back next week. We're going to have duo cash cups into FNCS, and we're going to have the solo victory cups every week. We're also, after this FNCS, going to jump straight into a new season and the last chance major, the last chance to qualify for the global championship, which is going to take place next season. So there's a bunch of crazy stuff coming up in competitive. I am obviously back uploading these videos on my main channel. I'm sorry, I had to try and figure some stuff out. I tried some new stuff, but honestly, I'm back home to keeping you guys up to date with everything happening in Fortnite competitive.